Usually when we look at ancient historical texts, there's this underlying expectation that we're reading a literal account of events.
Right, like a standard history textbook.
Yeah, exactly. You read about a city or a river, a specific person, and you just assume the writer is pointing at a topographical map and saying, there it is. That's what happened.
Grounded entirely in physical reality and, geographical coordinates.
Right. But then you step into the world of ancient metaphorical frameworks, and suddenly that physical map is totally useless.
Oh, completely useless, yeah.
We're looking at a textual landscape that operates on a completely different frequency. It's written in a highly specific, almost unbreakable code, where the physical world is really just a stand-in for a psychological and philosophical one.
Which completely shifts how we have to approach the reading. I mean, you have to abandon the literal modern lens entirely.
You have to learn the vocabulary of the cipher.
Precisely.
And that is the exact mission of our deep dive today. We've got our hands on this fascinating piece of source material. It's a translated transcript that essentially acts as a master key for this cipher.
It really is a master key.
It decodes the metaphorical use of water, rivers, marine life across all these various ancient biblical texts, pulling from Genesis, Revelation, Ezekiel, Matthew, and it weaves them all together into a singular, highly complex ecosystem.
And it does so with incredible consistency, which is rare.
It is rare, and I want to be clear right up front, what I love about this source material is that you don't have to view it as absolute religious truth to get something profound out of it. We are just going to trace the architecture of this idea impartially.
Right, as a purely philosophical framework.
Exactly. We're going to see what it says about human nature, the spread of ideas, and honestly, how we learn.
And the architecture is incredibly intricate. It builds a psychological model using agricultural and aquatic terms. But to understand it, we really have to start at the absolute base level of this ecosystem.
Which is the water itself.
Yes. In this framework, water represents words, teachings, or doctrines.
The source is very specific about this, actually. It notes that water can be truth, which they frame as God's words, or it can be non-truth, which they frame as the devil's words.
Right.
But the water itself is just the medium, right? It's completely neutral in its base form.
Exactly. The base form of water in this framework is simply information. It's the raw content being transferred from one entity to another.
Okay, so it's just data.
Right. The morality of the water, whether it's life-giving and clarifying or toxic and destructive, that depends entirely on its origin point.
Which the source identifies as the spring or the fountain.
Yes.
It explicitly states that the spring represents the root or the source of these words, specifically the mouth of a teacher.
Right, the speaker.
The transcript notes that Jesus is referred to as a spring, but crucially, a false teacher or a demon can also be a spring of bad water.
Right, they can spout toxic teachings.
So drinking water in this context isn't about physical hydration at all. It's about internalizing a philosophy. I keep picturing it like downloading a software update to your phone.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, because you have to be absolutely certain the spring is a verified, trusted developer. Otherwise, you're willingly downloading malware.
Taking that software analogy a step further, it completely changes how we read the stakes of these ancient texts. I mean, culturally, we're deeply accustomed to reading stories set in ancient Middle Eastern deserts, right?
Right.
Where literal physical water is the ultimate scarcity. Finding a physical spring meant the difference between life and death for an entire tribe.
You find it, well, your family survives, you don't, you perish. It's that simple.
Exactly. But this framework argues that the writers of these texts weren't giving us a topographical map of scarce desert resources.
They weren't just talking about staying hydrated.
No, they were using the most universally understood concept of survival to warn us about our intellectual and spiritual vulnerability.
Oh, wow. So every single time you listen to a teacher, a leader, a politician, or a philosopher, you are drinking.
Yes. You are taking their internal state, their worldview, and making it a part of your own biology.
That is intense. Because if their spring is polluted with non-truth, you aren't just hearing bad ideas, you're actively poisoning your own mind.
You're taking the malware and installing it directly into your operating system.
That makes the act of listening feel incredibly dangerous. You aren't just a passive audience member, you are ingesting an ideology. So, okay, if I drink this water, if I download this software update from a teacher and internalize their philosophy, what happens next?
Well, rivers don't just pool up forever.
Right, where does all that internal water go?
It has to flow outward. The consumer of the water is fundamentally transformed into a conduit for it. And this is where the source brings in the concept of the temple, specifically referencing Jerusalem.
I noticed that. But in this cipher, the temple is not a literal stone building with pillars and altars, is it?
No, not at all. It represents a person. The source specifically points to Jesus' body as the ultimate temple in this framework. And connected to that temple are 12 gates or doors.
Representing the 12 disciples.
Exactly. Through which the water, the teachings, flows out to the north, south, east, and west.
So a teacher, the spring, originates the water. But a single spring can only hydrate the immediate people standing around it, right?
Yes, physically speaking.
But by pouring that water into disciples, those disciples become gates, systematizing and distributing the philosophy in every direction.
It's essentially a decentralized distribution network for ancient information.
That's fascinating.
And to illustrate how this distribution network actually functions on a human level, the source spends a lot of time analyzing a highly unusual vision from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 47.
Right, the measuring line vision.
Yes. In this vision, a prophet is led by a divine figure who is using a measuring line to track water flowing out of the temple. And the increments being measured are exactly 1,000 cubits, which translates to roughly 500 meters.
And the prophet is led physically through this water. So first they go 500 meters, and the water is ankle deep.
Right.
Another 500 meters, it's knee deep. Another 500, it's waist deep.
Yep.
Finally, after the fourth measurement, it becomes an impassable river that you absolutely have to swim in.
And the transcript spends a significant amount of time mocking anyone who tries to read this passage literally.
Oh, it really goes after the literalists.
Yeah.
And honestly, I can see why. Hydrologically speaking, this vision makes zero sense.
Not at all.
Like, imagine water flowing on a perfectly flat desert plain for 500 meters, but it only reaches your ankles.
Right. It doesn't spread out or dissipate.
Yeah, and then it magically jumps to your knees for another half kilometer without any geographical containment.
Yeah.
Geologically, there is no underground water source in Jerusalem that could produce this kind of spontaneous, massive river out of nowhere.
No, if you try to map Ezekiel 47 onto the physical world, it's geographical nonsense.
It's absurd.
But if you apply the cipher we're discussing, the 1,000 cubit increments are actually a brilliant architectural metaphor for the stages of human comprehension.
It's charting the psychology of the learning curve.
Exactly.
Okay, walk me through how the depths map to human psychology. What does ankle-deep learning look like in real life?
Well, think about what happens when you are exposed to a profound, paradigm-shifting truth or a complex new philosophy for the very first time.
Okay.
The first time you hear it, you might grasp the basic vocabulary. You are ankle-deep, you're in the water, you feel the chill of it, you recognize it's there.
Yeah.
But your center of gravity is entirely your own. You are fully in control of your own footing. You can easily step out of the river onto dry land without much effort.
You can leave the philosophy behind whenever you want. It hasn't changed how you walk.
Right. But if you stay and you listen again, you hit the second 1,000 cubits. It's knee deep. Now, the water is creating physical drag.
Oh, I see.
It takes effort to walk against the current. The philosophy is starting to challenge your pre-existing notions.
And the third time, you're waist deep.
Yeah.
At waist deep, your buoyancy is fighting gravity. You can't move normally anymore.
Exactly. The environment is dictating your movements. The philosophy has significantly altered how you view the world. And by the fourth time you hear and truly internalize this complex truth, you are entirely immersed.
It becomes an impassable river.
Yes, you can no longer just casually wade through this belief system. It carries you. It sweeps you away. The 1,000 cubits isn't a measure of physical distance. It's a measure of the deepening of conviction.
It takes repeated, measured exposure to fully internalize a worldview.
Yes.
Hearing it 4 times immerses you entirely. That completely explains a recurring theme in these ancient texts, where the disciples themselves don't understand the teachings the first time they hear them.
Right.
They ask foolish questions, they get confused, they were only ankle deep.
Exactly. They hadn't internalized it yet.
They needed time and repeated exposure to the spring before they were swept away and could become rivers themselves. But here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I want to push back a little on this. If the temple is a person and the water is the teaching, what about the tree of life mentioned on the riverbanks?
Ah, yes.
The texts say these trees bear 12 fruits. Are the trees people too?
Yes, the expert source confirms this. The trees represent the disciples bearing fruit, which means they're producing good outcomes or new believers from this water they've absorbed.
Okay, so the whole ecosystem is made of people.
Entirely. People are the temples, the gates, the trees. It's a completely human landscape.
Wow. Okay, so let's follow the water further. The spring creates the river grows as it spreads through the gates. But all rivers, no matter how long, eventually empty out into something larger. Where did this ecosystem end up?
The culmination of the entire metaphorical framework is the sea, or what the texts sometimes call the many waters. Referencing Revelation 17, the source explains that the sea represents the world. It's the multitudes, the nations, the chaotic mass of humanity at large.
Okay, so if the sea represents the world of humanity, then the things living in the sea, the fish, must represent individual people.
They do, but the source introduces a very strict, almost harsh dividing line between what it considers good fish and bad fish.
Based on what?
This division is entirely based on how these fish interact with the water ecosystem.
Right, I read this part. The text notes 2 specific traits for a good fish. First, they have to have scales. The source interprets scales as a representation of protection and truth.
Yes.
Second, good fish actively swim upstream. They fight the current of the sea to get back to the clean water, back to the pure springs, in order to spawn.
Exactly.
The transcript even references the ancient Chinese myth of the carp leaping the dragon gate, like this ultimate exhausting struggle against the flow to achieve a higher state of being.
And that upstream struggle is the core mechanism of a good fish, because the sea, representing the world, is viewed by the source as inherently muddy, chaotic, and polluted by a million different springs of non-truth.
So it's just a giant toxic soup.
Essentially, yes.
And that defines the bad fish. These are the loaches, the eels, the bottom feeders. Fish without scales that thrive in the muddy, stagnant water.
Right. They love the mud.
But wait, hold on a second. The source goes on to call great fish or sea monsters, things like whales, crocodiles, and giant serpents. It calls them bad fish too.
Yes, it does.
It says these represent demonic forces, or the devil, who devour people in this dirty water. But crocodiles and whales aren't even fish.
No, they're not.
Doesn't that glaring biological error completely break the metaphor?
You would think so, but the biological inaccuracy actually reinforces the point the authors were trying to make.
How so?
Because the writers of these texts weren't marine biologists categorizing taxonomy, they were philosophers categorizing threats.
Oh, I see.
To them, anything dwelling in the deep, chaotic waters that could kill you was a monster of the sea. The muddy water represents a world saturated with toxic, false ideologies and destructive narratives.
So the predators use the muddy water to their advantage.
Yeah.
They don't care about taxonomy. They care about eating.
Precisely. The bottom feeders are the people who are comfortable in the mud. They don't seek clear truth. They are content in the confusion of the crowd.
Yeah.
But the apex predators, the crocodiles and whales, these are the malignant forces, the false teachers, the propagators of the malware we talked about earlier.
And misinformation thrives in obscurity.
Exactly. The muddy water protects the predators because it hides their movements, allowing them to devour the soft, vulnerable fish who have no armor.
Which brings us back to the scales.
Yeah.
How exactly do scales function as armor against a toxic idea? I mean, structurally.
Well, think about what a scale actually does biologically on a fish. It's a hardened, interlocking plate that deflects parasites, environmental toxins, and minor attacks. In this framework, your scales are your foundational principles. They are your critical thinking skills and your adherence to the truth you learned from the clean river. So when a toxic piece of misinformation or a predatory idea hits you in the muddy water, it bounces off your scales.
But without them, that idea burrows straight into your soft tissue.
Yes, you are utterly vulnerable to the crocodiles of the world. Swimming upstream, actively resisting the easy, muddy comfort of the crowd is the only way to maintain those scales.
And ensure the next generation, your spawn, is born in clean water rather than the toxic sea.
Exactly.
It's an intense, almost combative view of existence. The world is a muddy ocean, and you either have your armor on and you're fighting the current, or you're swimming in the mud waiting to get eaten.
It's very bleak.
It is. But the narrative doesn't just leave everyone to fend for themselves in the ocean. The fishermen arrive.
Yes, this is the intervention phase of the ecosystem. The source explains that fishermen, specifically referencing disciples like Peter, are sent out to cast a heavenly net.
So the net represents a form of judgment or sorting, physically pulling people out of the worldly sea.
Right.
But the most fascinating part of this transcript to me wasn't the dramatic catch itself. It was what happens after the fish are caught. It's the purification process.
Yes, quite detailed.
Yeah. The source points out that you cannot immediately consume, or in this metaphorical context, accept a fish that has just been pulled from the mud. It is full of toxins.
Right. You have to place it in a tank of pure, clean water so it can undergo a process the Chinese text refers to as tuni, literally spitting out the dirt.
And here's the part that blew my mind. The source highlights that some people can sit in clean water for 7 or 8 years and still refuse to spit out their toxic mud.
Yes.
8 years. Why so specific? What makes a fish hold on to a mouthful of mud for nearly a decade when it's literally surrounded by perfectly clean water?
Because it's a flawless metaphorical description of cognitive dissonance and the sheer agony of unlearning false beliefs.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the mud isn't just on the outside of the fish. As a fish breathes, water passes through its gills into its bloodstream.
Right, they're filtering it continuously.
Exactly. These fish have been breathing the mud, processing it, living off it. That toxic ideology has become integrated into their very biology. It is their identity.
So when they get pulled into a tank of pure, clean truth,
You would naturally assume the fish would be grateful.
yeah, you would think a person presented with clear, undeniable truth after living in a lie would immediately adapt and be thankful for the clarity.
Right. But human psychology tells us the exact opposite happens.
How so?
When a core belief is challenged, even by pure, undeniable truth, people experience intense psychological discomfort.
Oh, cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. It registers in the brain almost like physical pain, so they clamp their mouths shut.
They protect the mud.
Yes. The clean water environment is absolutely necessary for purification, but the environment cannot force the internal process. The fish must willingly purge the dirt.
And unlearning is deeply painful.
It really is. Admitting that you were full of mud, that you were wrong, that you were swimming in a toxic environment and defending it, that requires a massive ego death.
Which explains the 7 or 8 year timeline. It's not just a stubborn afternoon, it's a decade-long psychological war.
Exactly.
Some people will sit in an environment of absolute truth and stubbornly hold on to their mud because the mud feels like home. That's what they know.
It fundamentally recontextualizes how we deal with people who are trapped in misinformation or toxic ideologies.
You can't just yell the truth at them once and expect them to be instantly clean.
No, the fishermen have to provide the clean water and then exercise tremendous agonizing patience as the person slowly spits out the dirt day by day.
Wow. And to contrast that stubborn, muddy bottom feeder, the source mentions a gold standard and talks about a specific fish called the golden croaker.
Yes, the Huangwayu.
Right. The transcript says, this is an ideal, clean fish. It is supposedly so pure that you don't even need to remove its innards before preparing it. And when it is roasted as an offering, it turns this beautiful, brilliant golden color.
The golden croaker represents the individual whose internal state is entirely aligned with the truth.
They aren't faking it.
Right. They haven't just put on an outward appearance of goodness while holding mud in their mouth. There's no hidden toxicity to purge.
And the roasting part.
But the roasting process is a metaphor for trials or testing. When the golden croaker faces the fire, it doesn't burn into something ugly or reveal a belly full of mud.
It's true. Valuable nature is revealed under pressure. It turns gold.
It's the ultimate standard to strive for in this framework. You want to be the golden croaker, not the stubborn bottom feeder clinging to a mouthful of dirt.
This has been an absolutely wild journey through a highly complex way of viewing the world.
It really is an intricate system.
Let's trace the full ecosystem one last time just to lock it in. It starts with the spring, the teacher, who speaks words of truth or non-truth, right? That water flows into the consumer, who becomes a temple, acting as a gate to spread the teachings like a river.
Yes.
The deeper you go into that river, the more you learn, the more immersed you become, until the river washes out into the sea.
The sea being the chaotic world, filled with vulnerable fish, armored fish swimming upstream, and apex predators lurking in the mud.
Until finally, the fishermen cast their nets, pulling us out of the mud and into clean water, where we face the painful, necessary, sometimes decade-long task of spitting out the dirt we've swallowed.
It's an entire philosophy of epistemology, how we know what we know and how we protect our minds, wrapped inside an ancient agricultural metaphor.
And it forces us to interrogate our own intellectual consumption.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave everyone with. We obviously don't live in ancient times anymore. Most of us aren't drawing water from physical wells or fishing with hand-cast nets.
No, we have indoor plumbing.
Right. But this framework is arguably more relevant now than it was when it was written. If water represents words, information, and teachings, then the internet and our social media algorithms are the ultimate oceans of human history.
The sheer volume of water being pumped into the sea every second is unprecedented.
We are currently swimming in deeper, faster, and muddier waters than any generation before us.
Without a doubt.
So, you have to ask yourself, in this endless digital ocean, are you actively swimming upstream? Are you fighting the algorithm's current to find clean springs of verified, truthful information?
It takes effort.
It takes a lot of effort.
Ever.
Or are you a fish sitting comfortably in the algorithmic mud, passively absorbing the bad water of outrage and misinformation without even realizing it's filling your stomach?
A vital question for anyone navigating the modern flow of information.
Because in a digital world completely infested with crocodiles, how are you growing your scales today?
Exactly.
The map isn't just the territory. Sometimes the map is a mirror. Keep swimming upstream, everyone. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.